Welcome to Soul Nectar, a podcast for women who lead by frequency, embodiment, and soul essence. It's a portal into a new paradigm of feminine leadership, a return to your natural state of being as a woman, rooted in feminine essence, embodied wisdom, and inner wholeness. Here, your soul is nourished by transmissions that drip with sweetness, the honey of your own inner knowing. Each episode is nectar, soft, sensual, soul-led.
Your feminine wisdom that reminds us of our infinity, our divinity.
Welcome back to the Soul Nectar podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Magdalena. And if you're new here, I want to give you a little recap of my journey. And if you have been here with me all these years since I started to work with women, I also want to give you an update over the last few years and why I have stopped this work and why I am slowly coming back at it. So if you've been here from the very beginning, you remember my journey started in Germany, where I was a school teacher. And I had studied to be a school teacher for 6 years. I really thought that's my path. I was passionate about cooking and handcraft, the subjects I was teaching. I was really grateful I found my passion so early. I had a lot of free time to pour into my passions, to travel. But what happened over the years and pretty early on, to be honest, when I started actually being a school teacher, not just studying it, but being in the physical space of a school environment and all that comes with it, the teachers, the kids, the parents, I noticed that my energy was drained all the time. I would come home from work and I would need the rest of the day to just collapse on the couch and calibrate to my baseline frequency to be able to do anything. I couldn't even listen to music. I wasn't able to do much. So I knew already that maybe if it's draining me so much, it's not my path. It's not what I'm meant to do for the rest of my life. But I had just studied becoming a school teacher for 6 years, and there was nothing else I saw I was capable of that would sustain my life, basically. So I knew in my soul for a very long time that this is not my path, that this is not my soul's journey, that there's something else, but my human conditioning and my nervous system were so fear-based, and I was so afraid that I would end homeless, that I needed to know how and when and exactly the steps how to get there and prove that I can make it work, whatever that might be. So very early on, even while being a school teacher, I tried different ways to get that leap out of the system. Because when you're a school teacher in the position I was in, it's very comfortable and very convenient to stay in. You get private health insurance. I could get facials and massages with that insurance. I think being a school teacher in Bavaria is one of the most amount of holidays any job could get. So everyone was thinking I was crazy for not being grateful for that. But I believe if it costs you your life force and your energy and your joy and it drains you, these are all signs that it might not be the right path for you. And so I already knew I had to try something, and I was really committed to finding a way out so I could find my own way. And 10 years ago, I was in a relationship, in a brand new relationship after a long relationship. And in the beginning, everything was really amazing. And I went to the Philippines for a month during summer holidays, and we missed each other like crazy. And when I came back, I was on a motorcycle on his birthday. We were driving on the highway, and he knocked on my leg and said, "Put up your helmet." And I was like, "What?" And I could hardly hear him because we were driving on the highway. And he was like, "Do you want to move in together?" And I said, "Let's talk about it when we're there." Because I had moved twice that year. That breakup of my previous boyfriend was really challenging for me and brought up a lot of emotions that at that point, to be honest, I hadn't even processed yet because 3 months later, I already met that next boyfriend. And then when we were at the lake, he said, "So do you want to move in with me?" And I felt into my body and I really felt a clear no because we had just met. We were dating for 3 months. And I also didn't want to give up my yoga because when I was a school teacher, yoga was my life. For 10 years, I would go to a yoga class every single day. After calibrating on the couch, it was the thing that kept me going when yeah, there was not, it kind of gave me a bridge between these worlds, that deep spiritual side of me, and also rebalancing my system to be able to continue being a school teacher. And that worked for a while until the split between these two worlds became too big, and my soul really asked me to jump both feet in. And then he said, "Well, if yoga is so important to you, why don't we open a yoga studio?" And in my mind, it was like, ding, 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 ding. Oh my God, yes, that's the way I'm gonna get out of the system. I'm gonna open a yoga studio with him. And then when it's running well, I can just leave the school system and we'll have a yoga studio, maybe many. I've always had this entrepreneurial side since I was a kid, even in kindergarten, when I was traveling with my grandparents. I started traveling with them in their caravan since I'm 1 year old. Every weekend or the holidays, I would go with them around Europe and I would always handcraft things. And there was one summer where I would these bracelets out of pearls and out of knots. I don't know if you remember them. It was like a 90s thing. And people would line up on the beach to get a custom bracelet for them. So 6 weeks I spent making bracelets like a crazy person. And then I had a lot of money by the end of the holidays, and I could buy these handbags and these shells on the markets. I always had this side of me. And I've always been very curious and open for life and to experience as much as possible while I'm here. So my first impulse, it wasn't like, yes, let's do it. It was like, okay, maybe, yeah. And he was an entrepreneur, full-heartedly, a really successful businessman. So without even talking about it with anyone, the next day he had already scheduled appointments for visiting potential yoga studios that we could open. And it all happened so fast that I was kind of in it before I could even think about it properly, because I had just started to be a school teacher after my studies in that moment. It all happened at the same time. So I opened a yoga studio while being a full-time teacher and in this new relationship that turned out to be my trampoline into awakening. That's how I like to call this relationship. I'm really grateful looking back how everything happened, but it was very challenging in the moment. So we found the perfect studio. There was one that I really loved. It was a office from the 70s. And I really, really um, loved the ceiling. There were these golden circles on the whole roof. And I just see potential when I enter a room. I see what needs to go where. Even though I'm not visual, I know immediately what looks harmonious. I've always had this. I've rearranged my room as a kid so many times I stopped counting. I created so many temples around the world. Wherever I lived, I come into a room and I immediately feel what needs to be different, what I need to change to make it look and feel really harmonious and beautiful and aesthetic and artistic and just me. So I've always had this expression of my soul in interior and in creating spaces. And we received a yes for this studio. So out of this office of the 70s with yellow walls and ugly furniture, we threw out everything. It was a really big studio for our first studio. 100 square meters. And we created the most beautiful yoga studio. It felt like I could really pour my whole heart and soul into this project. And even during school, I would sew the mattresses for the beds in the entry area. We would go to lakes after the school and we would collect driftwood and we would make everything ourselves. So we would paint the walls, we would make the floor, we would renovate the bathrooms and the changing room. And it was a dream come true. I loved the creation process of it. I had no idea about how to build a website, a business, how to manage a team. I grew into it by jumping right into it. And because I was already moving while I noticed all these things that I had no experience about, that I kind of learned how to fly while I jumped off the cliff. And it was a very demanding time, as you can imagine. I spent 3 months every day with him creating the studio. And sometimes we came home at midnight and I had to be in school, which was 1 hour away from him at 7:30. And I'm not a morning person, so it was really challenging for me to keep going. But somehow we did it. And we opened this beautiful yoga studio. Everyone who came in was like, wow, this is you in a physical space. I can feel your heart, I can feel your soul. Every single detail was branded and designed in this just beautiful aesthetics. I really loved creating the space. And somehow I managed to find yoga teachers that were loving the studio and that came, most of them from Munich, to teach at the place. So while I was freshly starting as a new school teacher, I not only opened and created the space, I also collected the teachers, created a website. We even put flyers into homes in the area. For days, we would hand throw them into the mailboxes of people. We were in newspapers, the marketing strategies we knew back then. And it was a huge success. We opened, and after 3 months, we already had made profit, which we would have never believed. We thought we need to do this for 2 years, and then eventually we make profit. The problem was that the relationship was going downhill very quickly, and I've started to see dynamics and things that I couldn't see before, and it was very, very challenging for me and very draining. It was a very complex dynamic, to say the least. And after a few months, I think we were open 8 months, I finally found the courage to leave the relationship, and I was very entangled with the studios. So I knew when I leave this relationship, it also means I have to let this studio go. And my biggest fear was, because I've put so much energy in it, was that he would not pay me. And that's exactly what happened. But that's also the medicine I needed back then to disentangle my worth from money and also to see so many dynamics. I always say it's the trampoline into my awakening. And after that, I kind of crumbled. I was like, okay, I tried it. It failed. I might just be a school teacher for the rest of my life. And for a year, I stopped everything, even teaching yoga. And then my colleagues started asking if I can teach for them in school, because they just loved me as a person and my energy. And I started teaching in the classrooms after school. We pulled the chairs and the tables to the side, and I started teaching in the classroom. And I really started enjoying it. And then I had my best friend back then, one of the funniest humans I've ever met. We loved traveling, but we were both not having a lot of money, because I worked a few hours less and I was working towards my sabbatical, which means I got 1/3 less paid of my salary. And then the third year would have been completely off, but I would have still get that amount of money paid. That was my plan, to leave the system. And spoiler alert, I never made it to that year. But because of that, I didn't have much money. I think I was making 1.3 thousand euros. My flat was 800. My health insurance was 300. So I had maybe 200 euros to live. And somehow I still managed to travel and to do all these amazing things. But I remember me and my friend were thinking we would love to go to Portugal, but we would love not to pay for it. And then we said, why don't we try to guide a retreat? Both of us. She was a yoga teacher as well. Both of us have never done it. So we just booked a surf villa on the beach in Arifana in Portugal and posted it. And within an hour, it was fully booked. And I couldn't believe it. It felt like a whole world opened up to me. We didn't even make much money. I think we made 700 euros each, and we felt like the queens of the world, that we don't have to pay for our flights, for our hotel, that we get paid to do this, what we would also do for free because we loved it so much. So we brought a group there, and I guided my first retreat. And in that moment, I noticed this is what I want to do. It's not the weekly classes. I honestly hated teaching yoga every day. I was teaching 7 classes a week next to my teaching job as a school teacher in that studio. And I was getting bored so easily. I'm an artist, so I love to create and pour my heart and soul into things, but it's always a unique thing. So if you've been following me, you know I only launched every program, every retreat only once. Even my art pieces of my jewelry, there's usually only one time I launch it, and then after a while it's gone. And I love it that way because it always represents who I am in that moment. And if I have to replicate, unless I have a team doing it for me, I even get bored doing the same recipe twice. I love pouring and creating myself into things. I'm just in love with the creation process. Like I love creating the studio, but I noticed by doing it that I'm not the kind of person that loves teaching every day. I'm not the kind of person who loves managing a studio every day. I'm a visionary, I'm a creatrix. And through doing these things, we learn who we are, right? So I'm not regretting it at all. It was such a teaching. It was like my business studies compressed into a tough year. So we guided that retreat, and I noticed this inner knowing of that's what I'm meant to do. I knew that's something I want to do for the rest of my life because it allowed me to go so deep with women. It allowed me to feel the women, to use my gifts of empathy and of feeling the unseen and dynamics and potential and yeah, creating a safe space for women to meet themselves deeper. And I felt so much aliveness and so much joy, even though it was kind of challenging with that friend in that week. And I'm not going to go into that because that was very private. But I just felt that spark of like, this is what I'm meant to do. And for the first time in a long time, I finally felt that spark. And I was like, oh my God, that's the thing. So I started doing retreats on all school holidays, and it worked really well. It sold out effortlessly. The first retreats, I didn't even need to try to sell it. It would just fill up almost by magic hand. I had a private account back then. I had maybe 500 followers, but it always filled up with the most magical women. So we would go to Austria and to wellness hotels. We would go to the countryside of Bavaria. We would go to Portugal. We would go to all these magical places. I would love to travel anyway, and I got to bring people there. So I kind of combined all of my passions into retreats, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And then I kind of always followed these breadcrumbs. And then I just knew sometimes something drops into my body, and I knew that's what I meant to do. And I loved cooking. I was teaching cooking, and I was cooking for my friends and for my boyfriend every day. My whole creative outlet was food in that time. And I loved it. It was just so meditative for me and such a beautiful expression of who I was in food and also bringing people together. I really, really enjoyed it. And I attended some cooking shows that year on German television, and I won all of them. And I traveled to all these places for it. It was like the peak of my cooking career. And then I got this impulse, write a cookbook. And I was like, okay, I have no idea how to write a cookbook. And I started in my tiny apartment in Munich. My kitchen was very small, and I bought a used camera from eBay. And I just always learned while doing it how to do it without overthinking it. And that's a good thing on one side, but also there were many moments where I just wanted to throw everything out of the window and not um, do it again. So I started creating recipes. And in the beginning, I was so proud of what I created, even if the lighting was shit. And I kind of grew over time. And when I got the camera, it elevated the whole thing. And I had to press myself against the wall because it was so tiny. I had one black plate and a golden fork, and I created all the recipes of that cookbook with that one thing. So I was always kind of a magician in creating something magical out of nothing. And I I'm really proud of what I created. Like when I look at this cookbook, I'm still in awe of how I did it. And Melanie and Leah, one of my mentors, always says, you wonder how to do it until you wonder how you did it. And in everything I've ever created, it was always like that. I had no idea about photography, but then while I was a school teacher, I ended up because I was in middle school, and I think that only exists in Bavaria, students can graduate in cooking. So I was not only teaching them, I was also testing them at the end of the year to see, to give them the grades, which determined their future path. So I was there with a colleague, and he was about to retire, one of my favorite humans. And while we were testing these kids in cooking and also in other subjects, I told him about my vision and this cookbook and that I have no idea about photography. And then he's like, oh my God, it's one of my biggest passions. I love photography. I'm going to teach you. So during teaching, testing these kids, sometimes we had a few hours in between, and he would teach me everything about lighting and about photography and what I have to look out for. And I'm so grateful that he taught me that because it up-leveled this whole game. And somehow I always found a way to make it work without overthinking and knowing how. It's like you jump off a cliff and you learn how to build the airplane while you're falling down. That's kind of my life's path. And then the day I published my book, I lost my passion for food. After a decade, I just didn't want to cook anymore. My creative outlet changed from cooking, and then I founded a company called Yoga Crafts, where I did everything with my hands. And that's something I've been doing since a little girl. And I started making these huge dream catchers for yoga studios and branded candles and feather earrings and gemstone crystal sunglass holders and all these things that I loved doing. And during that time, it was a year before my sabbatical, my body shut down. So I've been dragging me from weekend to weekend as a school teacher still, kind of finding my flow again, teaching yoga in the rose garden, which is also funny how the rose is connected to my path, how it's always been connected to the Magdalene path. My second name is Magdalena, but that's going to be a whole new episode. And it looked perfect on the outside. I was like, wow, I'm so grateful. I get to travel, I get to pour into my passions. I have this safe income. I didn't have to worry about anything, but my body was taking a pull and my soul was knocking on my human, saying, this is not your path. You're here for something so much bigger. You have to let go. You have to trust. And I was like, I cannot. I cannot trust. This is too big. Like I know there's something, but I want to know how and when, and I want to know the 5 steps to get there, and I want to have proof that it's going to work out. And this is not how a soul-led path works. If you're on this journey, you know it's not that. You have to trust. You have to let yourself fall into the void over and over and over and over and over and over again. And when you think you've reached the capacity of your your ability to surrender, you have to let go again. And everything you've attached your identity to will be stripped away again and again until you're really anchored in your core frequency, until you know who you are as a human, as a soul, until you're anchored in your mission and you don't let your conditioning, your patterns, your relational dynamics sway you out of that center. So that's a training ground I've been on, a ninja training ground through initiation, through having stripped everything multiple times. But that was more coming after I quit my job as a school teacher. And so there was this one Friday afternoon when I came home from work and I've noticed that I've lost excitement for teaching yoga. I've lost excitement for teaching at school. I kind of dragged myself through from holiday to holiday, and I was just waiting for the 6 week summer holiday, and I was waiting for this sabbatical that was about to start in a year. And I kind of convinced myself again and again that this is my path. I'm on the right track. Just keep going. And it was summer 2020. I was about to turn 30. And I remember that I felt it vividly in my body how exhausted I was. And I signed up on for a retreat in Aruba with a woman called Yoga Girl. I really admired her path and the way she built a yoga center in Aruba. And I was listening to her podcast, and she talked about this retreat called Healing the Heart. And I bent over the bathtub, and with wet hands, I just signed up for this $3,000 retreat. And my human was like, what did you just do? You just signed up. It's like literally more than double what you earn in a month. And it's not the flight included. It's like all of your savings you have left. You just invested this in a retreat. And it didn't make sense. I was like, oh, oopsie, too late. But something in me knew I had to go there. So I flew to Aruba, went on this heart healing journey with a lot of somatic work. 12 hours a day from morning till evening. We did really intense somatic work, breath work, trauma healing, sharing circles. It was so intense. And when I came home, there was 1 week until that famous Friday afternoon where I dragged myself into school and home, and I just spent all day in bed and I couldn't really do anything. And I was like, wow, I invested all this money and time and energy to go to this retreat, and I was hoping to get my spark back. I was hoping to feel alive again and to feel excited about teaching. But all this retreat did, it brought so much to the surface, and it showed me very visceral in my body of how exhausted I truly was. And instead of having my spark back and getting it through a year, on that Friday afternoon, I came back from work. I had almost not slept that week, and I couldn't even close my door in my apartment. And I fell on the floor on my knees, and I could hardly breathe. And I just started sobbing. I started melting into a puddle, and I couldn't stop crying. And you know, that kind of cry that almost ends in a panic attack because you can hardly breathe. That's the level of breakdown I experienced. And for hours, I was just lying there, and I allowed myself to be honest with myself. For the very first time in a long time, I didn't try to convince myself that everything is fine and that I should be grateful and that I just keep going for another year and then I find a way out. I was really honest of where my body and my soul were in that moment. And that's the beauty if we get really honest and raw with the truth of what's real and not the bubbles of illusion we create to keep things going, because we know the consequences and the ripples of what will happen if we let ourselves fall. That is that we hear our soul speak most intensely on these moments where it's really dark, where we don't see a way out, where the human ego finally lets go and the soul can take over the lead. So while I'm on my knees, I hear my soul speak clearly. The little whispers suddenly turned into a very vivid voice and inner knowing that told me that I had to let this go, that this was the last day in school, that I couldn't continue walking the safe path that was not for me, that I had to trust the unknown, the uncertainty, and let myself fall and guided by life, that there was something so much bigger waiting for me, that my mission wasn't being a school teacher, that my mission was something much bigger than that on a global, on a almost cosmic scale. I didn't know what it was, but my soul just told me, you need to trust me. You need to let this life go. There's a much bigger life waiting for you, but first you have to let go of the life you created because it's a construct. It's not who you truly are. You're playing the role, but don't you see how exhausted you are? Your body is speaking to you. Finally, listen. And for the first time, I didn't resist and I didn't try to convince myself otherwise. I just listened. And that really did something to me. I noticed I need help, I need support. I can't do this myself anymore. Like my whole life, I've been trying to do it myself. I needed someone to support me in this. And then another year of still trying to hold on and having fights with government doctors. And I really saw behind the veil of the system, of the school system, but also in general of the matrix. And I saw that they don't have the best interest for us in mind. And I don't even want to go too deep into this, but she basically said I should take pills and go back to school next week, even though all the doctors, all the specialists told on paper that it wasn't safe for me to go back to school, neither for myself nor for my students. Because what this burnout did was almost bringing my sensitivity to such a heightened state, especially to noise, that I didn't have any other choice than to retrieve myself back into nature. I couldn't be, I was so noise sensitive. I couldn't go to restaurants. I couldn't go on the streets. I couldn't go in the subway. Every noise that wasn't nature, even people talking in one room, felt like someone's penetrating me with a steel knife. So here I am, 30 years old. Everyone's building a family, building a business, and I'm just a mess. I'm just nothing. I'm just really not able to do anything. And in my mind, I was spiraling of, oh my God, if I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life, there's nothing I can do anymore. I can't live here in Munich anymore. Everything is too much for me. I can't go even in front of my house. I was living in the city center, but everything was too much. And I feel our soul orchestrate these moments so we finally change things if the whispers don't work. And by now I've found a way to listen to the whispers. If you're wondering why I live the life or why I live my life the way I do, it's because I've waited too many times to wait for the scream until I really listened to the whispers. So I went to Sri Lanka. I managed a yoga studio there. I did a few things on the side to kind of figure things out where I didn't have to pay rent in Sri Lanka because I was managing that yoga studio. I I knew I couldn't be here in winter. That was very clear from the beginning. My soul was very loud. It wasn't even a whisper. It was a drumbeat soul knocking of leaving Germany in winter. And I kind of dragged myself out of these dark places because a burnout always comes with depression. And it's basically just your soul being tired of your human pretending to be someone you're not. And my brand, Yoga Crafts, where I did these huge dream catches and all the things I talked before, were basically my way of channeling that energy into something and to it was the only way my mind wouldn't go into these dark places of ending where my mind wanted to convince me I would end homeless and I wouldn't make it work. Like all these dark thoughts would come and were spiraling. So my creativity has really helped me to stay present and to trust and to take it day by day, to not need to have it all figured out in that moment. And from there, when I quit being a school teacher, which was such a big step for me because I felt before I gave that letter where it said quitting this position, which I think not many teachers have ever done because it's such a safe position I had, it was a lifelong position. But I remember when I gave it to the government, it was the same building my grandfather had escaped from war in Dresden as a refugee. The first time he went to jail, the second time he succeeded, and he just went into the government and asked for a job. And it was the same building that I gave my letter to quit. So it was kind of a full circle of my lineage closing. But I also knew in that moment, by me declaring that and choosing myself, I would lose my grandparents. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, to have my own family turn against me. And that took a lot of deeper layers to uncover. And that might be a topic for another journey. But you walking your soul path will always require you to choose yourself with all the ripples it creates. And from there, I knew there was a place on this planet that I had been seeing for 15 years. And that's where Morea comes into the game. I knew there was an island, and I've been looking for this island my whole life. For 15 years, I had been receiving visions of turquoise water, white sand beaches. And these visions came in the most random moments. For example, I was riding the bicycle to school, convincing myself that this is my dream life, my dream job. And suddenly this vision came, turquoise water, white sand beaches. And it was always connected to this longing for home. It wasn't just, oh, that's a nice beach. It was this aching longing for home. And I often started crying. So when it came on the bicycle, I was holding onto the traffic light and I just started bawling my eyes out because it was this moment of truth that landed in my body that knew exactly that the lies I've been telling myself, that this is a great job and that I should be grateful and that Germany is not that bad, that were all just lies, that it wasn't the truth. And we know the frequency of truth when it lands in our bodies. No matter how strong our minds are, we feel it visceral in our soul and in our hearts. So I have been chasing this island for 15 years and I was looking on the maps for white sand beaches, turquoise waters. And if you look through my Facebook or Instagram through the years, I've went to many places with white sand beaches, turquoise water. But I didn't know where this island was. And I asked and I prayed, and everyone thought I was crazy. And I just knew this place existed. Now, years later, I know that it's not necessarily Morea, but that it was a glimpse of Lemuria. And that's also another episode. There's so many topics I want to go deeper into. But that Morea would be the catalyst that would bring me home to my soul. And that's truly what I was longing for because I was so disconnected. Oh, that's actually not true. I was connected to my soul, but I didn't live in alignment with my soul. It was like two entities, my human and my soul, and they were working against each other. Whereas now I'm constantly trying to find a weaving between the two where they can work in harmony and I don't abandon one of them. But anyhow, I had been seeing this island for 15 years, already started doubting if it even exists, even though a part of me knew it existed. And then I received a story on Instagram. My friend, one of the only friends who believed in my crazy vision, sent me the story and she said, "This looks like your island that you've always talked about." And I looked at this story and it was a woman, Jessica Y. She was on the shores of Moorea. And the moment I saw this picture of this woman in Moorea, I dropped on my knees and I couldn't stop crying. But this time the crying wasn't a sad crying. It was this inner deep soul knowing that this is the place I've been seeing in my visions for 15 years. And it didn't even matter what everyone was thinking because for the first time, I didn't need anyone to understand because I felt it in my bones, in my soul, in my heart, in my whole body. The way my body reacted, I knew this is the place I need to go. This is the place I've been seeing for 15 years. And no matter what it takes, I just knew the next step was to move there. So in the next few months, when I came home from Sri Lanka and from Bali, I gave up my whole life in Munich. I gave up my apartment. I sold everything I ever owned, packed my life in one suitcase, bought a one-way ticket, closed everything in Germany, said goodbye to everyone, and moved to the other side of the world. If you don't know Moorea, it's a tiny island in French Polynesia, close to Tahiti, and the most pristine, magical place I have ever been to. And it was the most courageous thing I have ever done in my entire life. I truly bowed to the version of me who had the courage to do this. I was flooded with terror in my body embarking on that airplane. I had guided a few retreats before I left, and everyone knew. I shared publicly on my podcast, which was called Living Free back then, about leaving. I felt the projections of people who never went for their dreams. I felt the fear. I felt everything from other people of what this one decision rippled in the field. It was massive. It was like almost like a bomb that rippled out into the field, and it shattered all these not lived dreams in people, and it awakened all the fears that people have why they don't follow their soul path. And I was sitting in the airplane doing EFT while crying my eyes out, thinking I might have done the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know a single soul. I have never been to Moorea before I moved there. And the moment I saw her, and this makes me emotional every time because I saw after this long journey of 30 hours flying to French Polynesia from Germany, I saw Moorea from the taxi from Tahiti. And she looks so majestic with these dragon-like mountains and the turquoise water everywhere. And it felt like she whispered to me, "Welcome home." That's what I heard her say. And when I took the ferry to Moorea, I saw a rainbow and dolphins. And there's a goddess mountain that you see when you move towards Moorea. And it was the most pristine moment of my life. And the whole island welcomed me and said, "Welcome home. I got you." And even though this whole journey didn't turn out the way I imagined, because in my mind, I thought I'm going to move to Moorea and this move of courage will be rewarded. And I will find the love of my life and we're going to create a retreat center. And it's this happy ever after story in Moorea. And I'm spending the rest of my life. I was really committed of spending the rest of my life in Moorea. Until I left, I thought I'm going to spend my life there. And I arrived, and the first few months were magical. There were stingrays guiding me to people I was meant to meet. There were rainbows and rain that felt like glitter from the sky. And there were sharks and whales jumping in the background. And it was just this pristine beauty of feminine magnetism and rawness. And Moorea is the feminine pole of the earth. If you dig a hole through Moorea all the way through the planet, you end up in Egypt, in the pyramids of Cairo. which you look at it, it's the masculine pole. It's very Atlantic technology. If you look at the buildings, the technology of the pyramids and everything that was built there, we're still figuring out what that is all about and how intelligent that actually is, that it's so obvious it wasn't created by humans. It was a civilization much more advanced than humans. And Lemuria is the feminine pole of the earth. So everything is very feminine, spirally, truly magical, beautiful. So every day I had to rub my eyes of the pure beauty of this place, how beautiful Morea truly is. There's flowers everywhere. The water is so clear. You can see every grain of sand at the bottom of the ocean. Every morning I would paddle out for sunrise to swim with the rays and sharks, and it felt like God poured honey over my nervous system. It was a soul purification process that I am infinitely grateful for. So even though Maria didn't give me the happy ever after story that I imagined, she gave me so much more. She held me like a mother while I was moving through some of the densest and darkest layers of human consciousness. There were layers of my own pain and trauma, of all the suppressed emotions I didn't feel in the past. There were layers of my ancestral line that I alchemized through my body. There were collective layers. It made me face my deepest and darkest fears. And it truly stripped everything that I was not. So I could come home to myself, to my soul, to the purity of my being. And it was a brutal journey. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't like I moved to Morea and everything was rainbow and butterflies. It was quite the opposite. And while I was being surrounded by the most pristine beauty of this planet, it truly feels like heaven on earth being there. I was moving through the darkest night of the soul, layer and layer, deeper. It took me deeper and deeper and deeper into the underworld, into the subconscious layer of my being. And there were days where I thought I can't handle it any longer. It got so dark and so painful, where my whole pain body got activated and I just couldn't hold it any longer. It would have been so easy to quit. But there was this voice that just told me to keep going, that it's all going to be worth it. And in that time, and I also want to share more about how this inner journey has showed itself on what I'm offering. So if we spiral back to opening the yoga studio, writing the cookbook, and then slowly, I didn't mention that, but during the pandemic, which collapsed this whole theory of I'm going to make it work through retreats, which was my plan, I started creating online retreats. I got the download the day before the pandemic hit. I was in Sri Lanka at that time. And my soul told me, start recording online yoga videos, meditations, do what you offer in your retreats, but do it online. And I was like, okay, I had to move through so many layers of fear around being seen and being on camera. I was so contracted and shut down in front of cameras in the beginning. But I kept going and I moved through it and I evolved along the journey. And so I started offering online retreats. And first it was my cleanse program. That was my first online retreat, the Yogis Cleanse. So I would cook with my students online. We would make this whole program of my book, which is a 10-day cleanse program where you do a holistic cleanse with the Ayurvedic cleansing techniques, where you drink 5 liters of isotonic salt water and clean your whole digestive system. It's a step-by-step 10-day journey. And we've done that online, which was amazing because it kind of was the beginning of this path where I went to Bali and I guided a retreat with women from all around the world from a villa I rented. So it kind of opened this whole new timeline. And as I went deeper into my feminine embodiment practices and my own healing journey, it always reflected on the offerings I was putting out there. So after the podcast and after the online retreats and the in-person retreats, I also started putting together online courses. One of them was Dripping in Self-Love. One of them was Rise with Purpose. One of them was Cracked Open. One of them was Soul Aligned, Soul Led Mastermind, Feminine Embodiment Leadership Training. So everything I moved through and became embodied in, I felt called to offer to women. So all of my programs, all of my offerings have shape-shifted over the years. They always went a layer deeper. They went from cooking and health and holistic cleansing to the deeper layers of inner child healing, self-love, self-care, nervous system regulation, to feminine embodiment, which was truly the essence of my work, feminine leadership, feminine embodiment. And it was such a beautiful journey. Every program I channeled has transformed and brought together women. There were some of you that journeyed with me from the very beginning, from meeting me in Sri Lanka to journeying through many online offerings or coming to see me in person in one of my retreats. And when I moved to Moorea, that also deepened. So it's funny how I always think I have a plan, and then Spirit shows me by stripping it away that it's not the highest path anymore, which brings up all these fears. And then when we move through them, it shows us our true resilience and what we're capable of and guides us towards the right path. So when I moved to Moorea, to spiral back a little, you know how my brain works by now. It's a little bit ADHD sometimes. But when I arrived in Moorea, I gave myself a month. I took a break of the podcast because I knew it's such a big step. I need to integrate and to arrive and find a place to stay. And yeah, nothing was sorted when I arrived there. I built my life from scratch in one of the most expensive places in the world where I didn't have the finances to make it work, but I just knew I will find a way. I trusted myself enough to know I can make this work. There's no plan B. I have to make this work. So when I arrived on the island, my plan was to launch another round of the Cleanse Home Retreat, which was the third round by then, and it has grown over the years. So it went from 9 women to 19 women to 29 women. And my goal was with this launch to have 50 women. And I launched it and I had 1 woman signing up. And suddenly this whole plan of, I don't know how much money I would have made, maybe 5K, which would have allowed me to live 2 months from on the island, crashed in an instant. And it brought up my deepest fears of, oh my God, I'm going to end homeless. So for me, money was very much attached to survival and death, which makes a lot of sense when I look at my ancestry and the war history of my grandfathers who had everything taken from them in an instant and not having food. And I might share more about this. This would be a whole episode on its own. But basically, we inherit these nervous system imprints of how our body reacts to specific situations. And if we don't bring awareness into our ancestral trauma, we carry that forward and we pass it down to our children. So that's why I was shown all these imprints so I could excavate them by moving through them. And first I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do now. And I had this moment again, you need support in this. You need someone who has been in that. And I had a dream about a woman who was living in Hawaii and she had a similar journey. She just knew she had to move to Hawaii when she was living in the States. And she had already moved through all these layers of building a new life, of trusting your soul, of building a business with your gifts in alignment with your heart and soul and who you are. But I didn't know all of this. I just had a dream where my soul showed me the color of her soul and my soul, and telepathically I was shown you have to work with her, she can support you. So the next day I reached out to her and I said, I know this is super random, but I had this dream. Are you offering business coaching? And she's like, oh my God, I set these intentions and it's such a beautiful proof that they work. And I was putting out someone to support someone in exactly what you're looking for. So we jumped on a call. I did the craziest, scary investment of my life because I think it was 5K for 3 months. And it was all the money I had left. So it was like a poker game. You put everything on that card, but if it doesn't work, it means you don't have food, you can't survive, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily. Was a little kinky back then. But in that moment, I knew I just knew my soul was like, trust, just go all in. So I invested all this money I had left while nothing came in. And within the first few calls, we created a structure and an offering, and I expanded my offerings. I started offering one-on-one containers for 3 months, and that allowed me to have the investment back within a few weeks. And from there, I built a whole new strategy and a whole new offer baseline for my business. So things started to build up again. I found a beautiful temple on the beach where I could paddle out with the rays and sharks every day. I continued my weekly podcast. I went into offering sacred sexuality topics, which was super scary for me at that point because I still had all these school colleagues following me. And then suddenly I was this Tantra teacher, and it was very scary. And there were many offerings where nobody signed up, where I just kept showing up. And some of these launches failed in quotation marks because I believe there's no failed launch. We really learn and grow from still showing up and to disentangle our outcomes to our worth and to the mission. That one failed launch doesn't mean we're not supposed to do it, but it keeps us going and it helps us to refine what we're meant to offer to the world. And then, yeah, things started flowing again, and my business started to really attract the right women that I wanted to work with. And I started to work with them one-on-one. Some of them that I had met in Sri Lanka were still working with me. And then I started offering my first retreat in Moorea with the whales. If you know my journey, and it's also going to be a single episode about how the whales have changed my life and why they are so dear to my heart and soul, and why I love taking women out to swim with them. But that was the first retreat that, because it was so far away, that didn't fill up. So before I was so spoiled by having filled out retreats the whole time, to having to pay on top of my expenses. So I didn't make any money with that one. And it was a huge leadership initiation. And yeah, things were just not easy while I was in Moorea. There was no community. I had a few single friends, but I felt very isolated and lonely while moving through all of these dense layers of trauma healing and pain. And after 2 years, I I knew I had to go into the world again, but keeping Moorea as a base. And I went to Mexico to a retreat in Tulum, where I'm also recording this episode. And this might get too long, so I'll keep it really short. I attended a plant medicine retreat back then. At this point, I'm not doing any plant medicine anymore. And I have episodes. If you look for Soul Naked podcast, that was the name before the rebrand. So first it was Living Free, then it was Soul Naked, and now it's Soul Nectar. I shared a lot about these journeys and my mystical experience and expansion in them because I am a very cosmic being, and I was shown a lot about my mission, about universal consciousness. At one time, I morphed with universal consciousness, about my soul mission on this planet and why I'm here. And so I'm not going to go too deep into this, But when I went to Mexico, a whole new timeline opened with the jewelry, and my own healing journey began to become so deep that I wasn't able to hold space for people anymore. So if I summarize the last 2 years, the reason I stopped what I was doing, it was also very soul-led. While I went through the deeper layer, I was told by my soul to burn everything to the ground, to stop the podcast, to stop the one-on-one, to stop the online offerings, the retreats, to burn everything down and to just focus on my jewelry. So if you don't know me, there's a whole story around the jewelry of how it started, but it would just explode the framework of this podcast episode. But basically, when I came to Tulum, there was one time where I went to the medicine retreat, and it blew my whole world open. I assisted a feminine leadership retreat in Costa Rica and went back to Morea. And at that point, my gifts of telepathy, my remembrance of Lemuria were so expanded and so vivid that I heard the island speak. And Morea told me, "You're not supposed to be here anymore. You're supposed to share the magic this island gave you with the world." And I didn't want to listen. Morea was my everything. My identity was attached to Morea. So I thought I can just keep it and not listen. Like you already know, not listening to my soul has never really worked because the whispers become louder. So I had to pay the price for that later on. But I went traveling. So there was someone who tried to break into my bungalow, which brought up a lot of fear, and I had severe PTSD from that. But I went to Hawaii and then back to Tulum, and was a very adventurous, expansive journey. And when I went to Tulum, after a few months of magic and community, and it was just the most surreal time where I found so many sisters that were just as wild and feminine and sexual as I am in the most beautiful way. I went deeper into the underworld that I have ever went before. And it started with a rash that spread over my entire body where I wasn't able to sleep anymore. It was itchy, it was painful. I had to slap it or put ice to even bear it because if I would scratch, it would bleed. And it was just the most horrible thing I ever experienced. It forced me to isolate. For a whole month, I was horizontal. I had already stopped everything. Like I was pausing everything. I told my clients I'm in a big process right now. I need to pause. And then I had this thing growing on my throat. And if you've been following me since the beginning, you remember probably these pictures where I had this massive thing, this massive lump on my throat. And first, I didn't want to see a doctor. I tried everything holistic, and there's a lot in Tulum, everything natural to heal it. And nothing was working. Every morning I woke up and this thing was double the size and it was growing while this rash was all over my body. And from one moment being surrounded by sisters and magic, it just went so dark and everyone had left and I was surrounded. I went into these deepest hidden portals of my ancestry, of all the things I think every family line has that is rushed under the rug and everyone pretends it never happened. I saw everything. And my intuition told me, work with women who are really good at holding space for you and that you can't do this alone. So I watched my bank account going down, 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 my soul telling me to basically burn my whole life to the ground and to invest all the money I had left onto healers. And it always sounds so romantic to do this soul-led life. It sounds so magical and you just follow your soul, but it sometimes requires you to go beyond your capacity to trust, to go all in and to trust yourself so deeply that even if it makes no sense on the outside, you keep going. So I invested all my money into healers. I was working with 4 healers, 2 somatic women, and two other healers that were incredible. And we went so deep, so deep. When you think you're at the bottom of the ocean and you go a layer deeper and you're in the mud under the bottom of the ocean, that kind of summarizes that time. It was very dark. It was too much for my body to handle. It was a bit. And I think also all the unspoken secrets of my lineage came up in that moment and they needed an outlet. That's why this thing on my throat grew so much. It was all this accumulated, unspoken darkness that needed an outlet because it's all energy, right? And no doctor knew what it was. And when I saw a doctor in Mexico, he came to my home because at that point I didn't even leave the house. He looked at it and he said, "Oh, yeah, that's a tumor. And the surgery is very complicated. There's not a high chance of survival." So all I heard him say was, "You're gonna die." So everything went so intense that I had to stop everything. I stopped everything I was doing. And for 2 years, I just needed to move and devote my life to these initiations that were coming and to integrate and to ground myself from all these expansive moments I experienced in my plant medicine journeys, in my real life. And that year, every single thing my identity was attached to got stripped away. So my business in that moment. I also discovered all these dark secrets in my family, and I had to set real clear boundaries with family members that were not honored. And so I had to cut, or in that moment, it felt right to cut contact with two of them, which is not the case anymore. But for that period of time, it was necessary for my healing to not allow that level of boundary crossing in my life. And so my family, all my friends fell away. And then the only thing that kind of was stable in my life was Morea. So that's the only thing my identity could hold on to. And I went to Germany, had my surgery. Thankfully, it was a cyst, not a tumor, and everything went fine. A week later, I went to Ibiza, and I kind of felt like a different person after that surgery. It felt like all that accumulated darkness was gone, and I felt light again, and I felt like me again. And so much has shifted inside since that time, even though it was very challenging and it revealed so much of my relational dynamics and family constellations. And from there, it was a very adventurous year. I went to Burning Man and I went to Morea with Sisters After. I guided my very last journey in Morea with the whales that I had already planned. And then I went to Egypt on a pilgrimage. And when I left Morea, I thought I'm just going to go for a few weeks again and then I'll be back. And I didn't know that I'm going to leave it for good. So when I left Morea, I had left everything. I had my whole life there, right? I had my businesses there, my car, my cat, my house, everything was there. I arrived in Bali, and the day I arrived in Bali, the woman that had lived in my place, and she stayed there twice before everything was fine, started to go crazy. She threw my things into the ocean. I just got messages from my neighbor saying she's scared. She's screaming and she's singing all night in the shower and she's not feeding my cat. She's throwing my things into the ocean. And I just felt like my temple is being invaded and I can't do anything about it. So Morea got stripped in an instant from a distance, combined with the biggest betrayal I've ever experienced in my whole life, where one of my only friends I had in Morea, I trusted her with my car, and she drove it for 6 months herself. And then finally, we found a buyer, and she kept over half of the money for herself, or half of the money she kept for herself, and turned completely against me. So that again needed so much time to process and to be with. It shattered my whole worldview of what people are capable of. And especially because it was someone I deeply trusted and who was super supportive before. simultaneously, so many things happened that were out of my control that it was a truly one of the biggest initiations of my life. And simultaneously, the last thing my identity was attached to got stripped away. So that year, not only my business, my family, my friends, everything got dissolved into nothingness. Also, my home, where I thought I'm going to spend the rest of my life in, was like God put the last finger that I was gripping on, smashed it away, and I had nothing to hold on to. I didn't know who I was anymore. I was just dissolving on a daily basis. And that's exactly the reason I wasn't holding space. I couldn't even be in healing spaces where there were big cathartic moments and people were screaming and, crying and having anger releases. I was so sensitive at that point that I even had to leave those spaces. So I wasn't capable of holding space for other women. But after 2 years, this is 2 years have passed since then, and I've taken my time to really integrate and ground and to process everything that has happened. That was so much in such a short period of time that it truly feels like since I moved to Morea, it's only been 4 years, 4.5 years. It felt like lifetimes. It felt like 500 years in this 4.5 year period. And I needed so much time to integrate all of this in my body, in this physical nervous system. And there were months and months and months of just integration and sitting with it and letting it find its place in my psyche. My dreams were out of this world. When I started working with the Andaras, my dreams revealed so much of my psyche and my consciousness. And the last 5 months since I came to Mexico, I've really been invited into deeper layers of integration and grounding. And for the first time, I felt it bubbling up, and I've tried to record a few podcast episodes, and I've tried to put my feelers out on how to offer my work again to the world because it felt like I just disappeared. And I focused on my jewelry, which was a beautiful, magical journey. And I'm still gonna do that. But I also feel like I really, really miss creating spaces for women. I miss all of you. I miss connecting with you in person, online. I miss this work so much, and it's such a big part of my mission. And I deeply, deeply miss being with all of you. So this is my comeback. And we're gonna see how this is unfolding. But I'm so excited and so grateful you listened until the very end. And obviously, there's so many layers, and I'm going to talk about specific topics more in detail in different episodes. But I just wanted to say thank you. Let me know in the comments if you've been here from the beginning, if you're new here, when you found me, if you've met me, if you've been in one of my programs, what draws you to me, if you see yourself in any part of my journey. And I'm so grateful for everything that's about to come. Also, let me know your desires. If there's anything you would love for me to offer, I think this is a co-creation also, but it's definitely still about feminine embodiment, feminine leadership, smaller, intimate spaces where we can go deeper, where we can implement the multidimensionality of your soul. And I'm very excited for this. So thank you so much for being here. And I see you next time.